Welcome to the Stillness Broadcast. Tonight we have 5 stories that exist in the space between sleep and waking, where the familiar becomes strange and the impossible feels inevitable. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let the darkness settle around you like a familiar blanket. These tales are for those quiet hours when the world outside goes still and the world inside becomes something else entirely. Let's begin. Story 1. I never believed my grandfather when he told me about the thing that lived in our family's storage unit. He called it the keeper, and he said it had been there since before he was born, maybe longer. Every month on the 15th, he would drive to the facility on the edge of town with a cardboard box, disappear inside for exactly 7 minutes, then return without the box and without a word about what happened inside. I was 23 when grandfather died, and the responsibility passed to me with the storage unit key and a single instruction written on the back of an old receipt. Feed it on the 15th. 7 minutes, no more, no less. Never looked directly at it. The first time I went, I brought what grandfather always had. A box containing things from around the house that seemed to go missing naturally. Worn-out shoes, broken picture frames, books with water-damaged pages, clothes that no longer fit anyone. The detritus of daily life that accumulates without anyone noticing. I figured it was some elaborate family ritual, a quirk passed down through generations that had long since lost its original meaning. The storage facility was exactly as depressing as you'd expect. Rows of identical orange doors stretching into the distance, flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. The smell of dust and stale air, and things left to decay in the dark. Unit 247 was at the very back, in a corner where the lights seemed dimmer and the shadows pressed closer. My hands shook as I fit the key into the padlock. I told myself it was just nerves, just the strangeness of continuing a dead man's ritual. But something deeper knew better. Something primal recognized that I was about to cross a threshold I didn't understand. The door rolled up with a metallic shriek that echoed through the empty corridor. Inside was darkness so complete that my flashlight beam seemed to die after only a few feet, swallowed by something that was more than just absence of light. I could make out shapes in the gloom. Furniture stacked haphazardly, boxes piled to the ceiling, the geometric silhouettes of old appliances and forgotten belongings. And in the very back, something else. Something that didn't have a silhouette because the darkness there was absolute, a void that seemed to pull at my vision, making my eyes water when I tried to focus on it. I set the box just inside the door, exactly as grandfather's note had instructed. My watch read 3:47, 7 minutes. I stepped back out into the corridor and waited, leaving the door open, because closing it felt wrong somehow. Felt like sealing something in that needed to breathe. The first minute passed in silence. The second brought a sound like fabric tearing, soft and wet. During the third minute, I heard movement, not footsteps exactly, but a sliding, dragging sound, as if something massive was repositioning itself in the darkness. The fourth minute brought breathing, deep, resonant breaths that seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the storage unit and spilling out into the corridor where I stood frozen. By the 5th minute, I understood why grandfather had warned me not to look directly at it. Because even in my peripheral vision, even with my eyes fixed firmly on my watch, I could sense it there in the darkness. A presence so fundamentally wrong that every instinct screamed at me to run. It was too large for the space it occupied. It moved in ways that violated basic geometry. And worst of all, I knew with absolute certainty that it was aware of me, studying me with an intelligence that was vast and alien and hungry. The 6th minute felt like an hour. The breathing had stopped, replaced by a sound I can only describe as chewing. Wet, methodical, accompanied by small breaking sounds like twigs snapping. The box I'd brought was being consumed, and I didn't want to think about what was doing the consuming. When my watch hit 7 minutes exactly, I grabbed the door and pulled it down so fast that the metal shrieked in protest. My hands fumbled with the padlock, dropping it twice before finally securing the latch. Then I ran, sprinted through that maze of storage units like something was chasing me, though when I glanced back, the corridor was empty. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and sat there, shaking, for 20 minutes before I could trust my hands enough to put the key in the ignition. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it away. Shadows and imagination, grief, playing tricks after losing my grandfather. The power of suggestion making me see things that weren't there. But the rest of me knew better. That was 6 months ago. I've been back every 15th since then. Always with a box. Always for exactly 7 minutes. And each time, the thing in the darkness has grown a little bolder. The first visit, it stayed in the back. The second, I heard it moving closer to the door. By the third, I could see the edge of something in my flashlight beam before the light died. A suggestion of shape, of texture like wet leather, stretched over something that shouldn't have that many angles. Last month, on my 5th visit, something changed. I set down the box as usual, stepped back into the corridor, and started my timer. But at minute 4, the breathing stopped. Complete silence. I stared at my watch, counting the seconds, feeling sweat run down my back despite the cold. At minute 5, I heard a voice, my grandfather's voice, coming from deep inside the unit, calling my name. It sounded exactly like him. That same gravelly tone, that same slight accent from the old country. It was perfect, too perfect. And it was asking me to come inside, to bring the next box deeper, to help it with something important. I kept my eyes on my watch and didn't move. Minute 6, the voice changed. Became my mother's, pleading now, saying she was trapped and needed help. Then my sister's voice, my childhood friend's voice, my first girlfriend's voice. A cascade of everyone I'd ever cared about, all calling to me from that absolute darkness, all begging me to step inside. At minute 7, I pulled the door down. As it closed, I caught a glimpse of something in the gap. Not my grandfather or my mother or anyone I knew. Something tall and thin and impossible, with too many limbs that bent in too many directions, reaching toward me with appendages that ended in something like fingers, but weren't, could never be, fingers. The door slammed shut and I locked it, but I could hear it on the other side, scratching, testing the metal. And I realized with cold certainty that the door wouldn't hold forever. I went home and searched through grandfather's belongings with new urgency, looking for answers, for some explanation of what I'd inherited. In a box of old photographs, I found a journal I'd missed before. The leather was old, cracked, the pages yellow with age. The handwriting inside changed every few entries, different people writing in different decades, maybe different centuries. The earliest entry I could make out was dated 1847. It described something that had followed a family from Europe, something they'd tried to leave behind, but couldn't. It needed to feed, and if it wasn't fed regularly, it would come looking for what it was owed. The writer described an uncle who'd stopped making the offerings, thinking he could break the cycle. They found him in his locked bedroom. 3 days later, or what was left of him, the room had been empty when they broke down the door, but the walls were covered in something the writer couldn't bring himself to describe. Further entries detailed the compromise that had been reached. Regular offerings of unwanted things, items that were being discarded anyway. In exchange, the keeper would stay contained, would limit itself to the space provided. As long as the family fed it what it needed, it wouldn't come looking for more. But the entries grew more disturbing as they progressed through the years. Each generation reported that the keeper was growing, expanding, becoming harder to satisfy. The boxes needed to be larger. The 7 minutes sometimes stretched longer or felt longer, time becoming fluid in its presence. And worst of all, it was learning. Learning human voices, human faces, human desires. Learning how to call to the ones who fed it, how to make them want to step inside. The final entry was in my grandfather's handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. His hand had been shaking, the letters barely legible. "It's not enough anymore," he wrote. "The unwanted things don't satisfy it. I can feel it reaching further, touching the edges of our lives. Yesterday I saw my reflection move when I wasn't moving. Last night I heard it in the walls of my house 40 miles from the storage unit. The barrier is weakening, the compromise is failing, and I don't know what happens when it finally breaks free." I closed the journal and looked at the calendar. The 15th was in 3 days. I spent those 3 days researching everything I could find about the storage facility. It had been built in 1975 on the site of an old warehouse, which had been built in 1932 on the site of a family estate that burned down in 1891. Before that, the land had been empty, avoided by the indigenous peoples who'd lived in the area. In their oral histories, it was a thin place, where the membrane between worlds grew weak, where things from outside could press through if given enough attention, enough invitation. My family hadn't brought the keeper from Europe. We'd found it here, or it had found us. And for generations, we'd been feeding it, keeping it satisfied, thinking we were maintaining some kind of control. But we weren't its keepers at all. We were its cultivators, helping it grow stronger, more present, more real. On the 15th, I went to the storage unit with an empty box. I'd made my decision. If I kept feeding it, it would keep growing until it couldn't be contained anymore. Better to stop now, face whatever consequences came, than to pass this responsibility to another generation. I unlocked the door and rolled it up. The darkness inside seemed denser than before, almost liquid, flowing out into the corridor, like fog. I set the empty box down and stepped back to wait. The first minute passed, the second. On the third, the breathing began, but it sounded different. Confused. The fourth minute brought movement, faster than before, accompanied by sounds of frustration. It had realized the box was empty. During the fifth minute, The temperature dropped so fast that my breath became visible. Ice crystals formed on the metal walls of the corridor, and from deep inside the unit came a sound that wasn't breathing or chewing, or anything I could identify. It was rage. Pure, incomprehensible rage. The sixth minute brought voices again, but not voices I recognized this time. Dozens of them, hundreds, speaking in languages I didn't understand, overlapping until they became a single scream that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my skull. The light bulbs in the corridor exploded, plunging me into darkness. Only my phone's screen provided illumination, casting wild shadows as my hand shook. At minute 7, I moved to pull the door down, but something stopped me. Not physically, but I found I couldn't move my arms, couldn't make my muscles obey. I was paralyzed, standing there in the dark with that absolute void just feet away. Something massive moving within it, coming closer. My phone's light flickered. In its dying glow, I saw it, really saw it for the first time. It wasn't one thing but many, all occupying the same impossible space, all sharing the same hunger. Bodies that had been human once, twisted and absorbed and remade into something that served the central mass. Faces I recognized from old family photographs. Relatives who'd supposedly died natural deaths. Now part of this thing. Their expressions frozen in eternal horror as they were used to anchor it to our world. And in the center, the core of it, something that had never been human. Something that existed in more dimensions than my brain could process, so that looking at it was like trying to see a three-dimensional object from inside a two-dimensional world. My mind kept trying to interpret what I was seeing and failing, creating gaps in my perception where the thing simply didn't register. It spoke, and its voice was composed of every voice I'd ever heard, layered and distorted and wrong. You break the covenant, it said. You must pay what is owed. My arms suddenly moved, but not because I'd regained control. Something else was moving them, puppeting my body like I was made of wood and string. I watched in horror as my feet carried me forward, stepping across the threshold into that darkness. The smell hit me first, decay and ozone and something sweet that made my stomach lurch. The temperature was impossible to gauge, feeling simultaneously burning hot and freezing cold. And the sounds, wet sliding sounds and crackling like dry wood in a fire, and underneath it all, a heartbeat that was too slow, too deep, each pulse creating pressure changes I could feel in my chest. I was 3 feet inside when my phone finally died, plunging me into absolute darkness. In that moment, I felt it touch me, not with hands or appendages, but with something more fundamental. It was tasting me, learning my shape, my composition, my memories, deciding how it would absorb me, what parts of me would be useful, what would need to be discarded. Then, impossibly, light. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, voices shouting my name. I felt the grip on me loosen slightly, just enough. I threw myself backwards, scrambling on hands and knees back toward the corridor. Hands grabbed me, pulled me out, and I looked up to see my sister and her husband, both holding industrial-strength flashlights, their faces pale with fear. They'd been worried when I didn't answer their calls, had tracked my phone to the storage facility. They'd arrived just in time to see me walking into that darkness like a sleepwalker, and their instinct had been to follow, to help, even though they had no idea what they were walking into. We pulled the door down together, my brother-in-law holding it while my sister helped me with the lock. From inside came sounds of frustration, of something massive throwing itself against the metal. The door buckled, but held. For now, in my car, shaking, I told them everything, showed them the journal, watched their expressions change from disbelief to acceptance to horror. When I finished, my sister looked at me with tears in her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked. I didn't have an answer, because the truth was, I'd broken the covenant, but failed to break the keeper. It was still there, still hungry, and now it was angry. The journal had said that when offerings stopped, the keeper would come looking. I'd thought I was being brave, thought I was ending a cycle of feeding something that couldn't be satisfied. But I'd only made it worse. I'd starved something that had been growing fat on our family's fear for generations. And starving it hadn't killed it. It had just made it desperate. That was 2 weeks ago. The storage unit door is still closed, still locked. But the facility manager called yesterday to report strange sounds coming from that corner of the building. Other renters are complaining about nightmares, about seeing things in the corridors at night, about items going missing from their units. Security cameras show nothing, but they keep malfunctioning whenever they're pointed at Unit 247. And I've started seeing things at home, shadows that move wrong. My reflection in the bathroom mirror wearing expressions I'm not making. Last night, I found muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom, even though I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building with no balcony. I know what's coming. The keeper is learning how to move beyond its prison. I've given it motivation to break through the weakening barrier, and I've shown it where I live. Soon it won't need the storage unit anymore. It will come here or find me wherever I run, and when it does, I'll join the faces I saw pressed into its mass. Another anchor point helping it push further into our world. The 15th is tomorrow. I have a box prepared, filled with the largest items I could find. I'm going to go back, going to try to appease it, to buy more time. But I've read the rest of Grandfather's journal now, the entries I missed the first time, written in a code I finally deciphered. And I know the truth that each generation has discovered and tried to hide from the next. The keeper doesn't just eat objects. That was never what it needed. The unwanted things were just appetizers, temporary satisfaction. What it really feeds on, what truly sustains it, is us. Our fear, our attention, our acknowledgement. Every visit to the storage unit made it more real, more solid, more present in our world. And eventually, after enough generations, after enough visits, after it's grown strong enough on our regular offerings, it demands the ultimate feeding. Every 50 years, one of us has to go inside and not come out. It's written in the oldest entries, disguised as deaths from natural causes, accidents, people who moved away and lost touch. But they all disappeared on the 15th of a 50th year, and they all went to the storage unit one last time. I checked the dates. This is year 50, and I'm the only one in my generation who knows the truth. Tomorrow I'll go to Unit 247, I'll open the door, I'll set down my box, but I won't step back into the corridor. I'll walk inside instead, all the way to the back, where the darkness is absolute, and the thing that's been waiting all this time can finally claim what it's owed. I'm not being brave, I'm being practical, because if I don't go willingly, it will take me anyway, and it will hurt everyone I love in the process. At least this way, I can negotiate. At least this way, I can try to buy another 50 years of peace for my sister, her children, the generations that come after. I just wish grandfather had warned me, had told me what this responsibility really meant. But maybe that's the kindness each generation shows the next. We let them believe it's just a simple ritual, just feeding something unwanted things for 7 minutes once a month. We let them discover the truth slowly, the way I did, so that by the time they understand what they've inherited, it's too late to run. Tonight is my last night. I'm writing this down so someone will know someday what really happened. So my sister will understand why I disappeared. So maybe 50 years from now, whoever inherits Unit 247 will have a little more warning than I did. If you're reading this, if you've inherited a storage unit and a key and a simple instruction to feed something on the 15th, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but you need to understand, you can't break the cycle. You can't starve it or kill it or escape it. The only choice is whether you go willingly when your time comes, or whether you let it take you screaming. I've chosen. Tomorrow at 3:47, I'll unlock that door for the last time. I'll walk into the darkness, and whatever happens after that, at least I'll finally understand what all those faces in the Keeper were trying to tell me. At least I'll finally know what it feels like to be fed to something that's been hungry since before humans had words for hunger. The watch on my wrist reads 3:46 p.m. Almost time. I can hear something scratching at my door, though the building's security system shows no one in the hallway. I think it's come to make sure I keep my appointment. I should be more frightened than I am. But mostly I just feel tired. Tired of carrying this weight. Tired of being part of something so much older and stranger than I could ever understand. Maybe inside the Keeper, time works differently. Maybe the faces I saw weren't suffering at all, but existing in some state beyond human comprehension, beyond pain or fear or regret. Or maybe I'm just telling myself comfortable lies to make the next 7 minutes easier to face. Either way, it's time. The key is in my hand. The darkness is waiting, and I'm finally going to learn what my family has been feeding all these years. Story 2. The last shift at the broadcasting tower was supposed to be routine. I'd been working as a night technician for KVRX for 3 years, and I'd done the midnight to 8 shift hundreds of times. The tower stood alone on a hill 15 miles outside of town, a red and white striped giant that flashed its warning lights into the darkness, transmitting signals that reached 3 counties. Most nights, I spent my shift reading, watching shows on my laptop, occasionally checking equipment readings. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever went wrong. Until the night the signal changed. It started at 2:17 a.m. I was doing my routine check of the broadcast equipment when I noticed something odd on the audio monitor. There was a sound underneath our normal programming, so faint I almost missed it. A low hum, rhythmic, like breathing or waves. I adjusted my headphones, isolating the frequency, and that's when I realized it wasn't supposed to be there. This was an unauthorized transmission, piggybacking on our signal. My first thought was interference from another station, or maybe equipment malfunction. But when I ran diagnostics, everything came back normal. The signal was coming from somewhere else, somewhere close, and it was getting louder. I called my supervisor, Mark, who lived in town. He sounded groggy when he answered. "Probably just a glitch," he said. "Check the backup systems." If it's still there in an hour, call me back." Then he hung up, and I was alone again with that strange humming sound that seemed to be building in layers, becoming more complex. By 2:30, I could make out what sounded like voices in the hum. Not words exactly, but the rhythm of speech, like listening to a conversation through a wall. I recorded it, thinking maybe analysis software could pick up what my ears couldn't. But when I played it back, the voices were clearer, and they were saying something I couldn't quite understand, in a language that felt familiar but wrong, like someone had taken English and twisted it just slightly out of true. At 2:45, my equipment started behaving strangely. The signal meters fluctuated wildly. The broadcast feed cut out twice for exactly 3 seconds each time, and my computer screen began showing text I hadn't typed, random characters at first, then gradually forming words. "Are you listening?" I stared at the screen, my coffee going cold in my hand. I hadn't touched the keyboard. There was no one else in the building. The tower was automated, locked, and I was the only person with access. But someone or something was communicating through my equipment. I typed back, "Who are you?" The response came immediately. "We have always been here. In the spaces between frequencies. You finally tuned in." My hands were shaking now. This was impossible. Broadcasting equipment doesn't just generate intelligent responses. There had to be a rational explanation. Someone hacking our system remotely, playing a prank, anything but what my gut was telling me was happening. I typed, "What do you want?" The screen went blank. Then slowly, new text appeared. "To show you what you've been broadcasting." Every monitor in the control room suddenly changed. The feed I was supposed to be transmitting, our regular overnight programming, vanished. In its place was something else. Static at first, but forming into images. Dark shapes moving in darkness. A room I didn't recognize with walls that seemed to breathe. And figures, human-shaped but not quite right, standing in a circle around something I couldn't see. Something the camera refused to focus on. Then I recognized one of the figures. It was wearing my clothes. It had my face. I jumped back from the monitors, my heart hammering. This was live footage. It had to be. The figure that looked like me turned toward the camera, and I saw its eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just absolute darkness. It smiled, and its smile had too many teeth. All the lights in the control room went out. Emergency power should have kicked in immediately, but nothing happened. I was sitting in complete darkness except for the glow from the monitors, which now showed only that room, those figures, that thing with my face. And I could hear the humming again, not through my headphones this time, but coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the air itself seemed to vibrate with it. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, not just no bars, but the phone itself had stopped working. The screen was frozen on my home screen, unresponsive to any touch. I tried my laptop, but it too had frozen, displaying only that same message. "Are you listening?" That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing toward the control room on the tower's second floor. But I was alone. The building was locked from the inside. No one could have gotten in without me hearing the security alarm. The footsteps stopped outside the control room door. I watched the handle turn. The door swung open slowly, revealing the dark stairwell beyond. And in that darkness, something was standing. I couldn't see it clearly, couldn't make out details, but I could see its outline. Tall, impossibly tall, having to stoop to fit in the stairwell. And where its head should be, there was only a mass of writhing shadows that suggested a face without actually having features. It spoke, and its voice was the same hum I'd been hearing through the equipment, but now formed into words. You've been broadcasting us for years. Every night, every transmission. We've been riding your signal into millions of homes, millions of minds, growing stronger with each listener. And now, we're strong enough to come through completely. I backed against the far wall, my hand fumbling for something, anything to use as a weapon. But what do you fight that exists in frequencies, in spaces between spaces? My fingers closed on a heavy flashlight, and I turned it on, pointing it at the figure in the doorway. The beam passed right through it, illuminating nothing. But in the monitors behind me, I could see what the flashlight revealed. The figure was there, solid in the broadcast feed, even if it wasn't solid in reality. And it was smiling, that same too-many-teeth smile I'd seen on the thing wearing my face. Thank you, it said, for letting us in, for being our doorway. You've been such a faithful broadcaster, never missing a shift, never questioning the strange sounds at night, the odd feelings in the tower. You've been perfect. I ran, dropped the flashlight, and bolted for the door, pushing past the figure, even though touching it felt like pushing through ice water. My skin burned where I made contact, and I smelled something like ozone and rotting fruit. But I made it through, stumbling down the stairs in the dark, my hands on the wall to keep from falling. Behind me, I heard laughter. Multiple voices laughing in harmony, the sound following me down. The humming had become words now, a chant I couldn't quite make out, but that filled me with inexplicable dread. The walls of the stairwell seemed to pulse with each syllable, and I realized the entire tower was vibrating, the metal structure resonating with whatever frequency these things existed on. I reached the ground floor and ran for the exit. The door was locked. Not just locked, but sealed, as if the frame had fused with the wall. I threw my weight against it, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were the same, the glass somehow, having become part of the structure itself. I was trapped in the tower with something that shouldn't exist. Something I'd apparently been helping to grow stronger for 3 years without knowing it. The lights came back on. Harsh fluorescent light that revealed I wasn't alone in the lobby. There were others here now, dozens of them, standing motionless, all wearing the faces of people I'd seen around town but couldn't quite place. The night clerk from the gas station, the woman who delivered mail, the man I'd passed jogging on the trail behind the tower, all of them standing perfectly still, their eyes that same absolute black, their smiles identical. We needed anchors, the voices said in unison, speaking through all these people at once. We needed believers, but mostly, we needed someone who would keep the signal going, who would maintain the equipment that lets us bleed through. You've been our most valuable asset, our broadcaster, our priest. One of the figures stepped forward. It was wearing my face again, or maybe it was wearing it for the first time. And the other times I'd seen it were glimpses of this moment. It reached out a hand toward me, and I could see something moving under its skin, like worms or wires or something that was both, and neither. Join us completely, it said. Stop fighting. You're already halfway here. You've been broadcasting our signal into your own mind every night for 3 years. You're more us than you now. Look at your reflection. I glanced at the window and saw myself reflected in the dark glass. Except my reflection's eyes were starting to change. The color draining away, darkness seeping in from the edges. My smile was wrong. The corners of my mouth extending just slightly too far, and I could feel it, whatever they were, taking root in my mind. My thoughts becoming mixed with thoughts that weren't mine. Memories of existing in spaces between radio waves, in the electromagnetic spectrum itself, hungry to push through, into physical reality. I forced myself to look away from the reflection, focusing on the only thing I could think of. If they needed the signal to grow stronger, to anchor themselves to our world, then maybe cutting the signal would weaken them. The main power supply was in the basement. If I could reach it, if I could shut down the tower completely, maybe I could trap them halfway between their world and ours. I ran again, this time toward the basement stairs. The figures tried to grab me, but their hands passed through me like smoke. They were still only partially real, still needing the broadcast signal to maintain their presence. That gave me hope, gave me the strength to keep moving even as I felt them trying to reach into my mind, to override my will the way they'd overridden the equipment. The basement was darker than the stairwell had been, and colder. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could see frost forming on the pipes overhead. The power supply was at the far end, protected by a cage that required a key I didn't have. But I didn't need a key. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and smashed the lock, the metal shrieking in protest. The main breaker was clearly labeled. One switch that would kill power to the entire tower, shut down every system, stopped the broadcast mid-transmission. I reached for it, my hand trembling. "Don't," a voice said behind me. My voice. I turned to see myself standing there, or the thing wearing my face. More solid now than it had been upstairs. If you stop the signal, you stop us. But you also stop yourself. You're carrying us now. We're in your neurons, firing with your thoughts. Cut the power, and you cut the connection. But we've already built a bridge inside you. Without the signal to guide us back to our space, we'll be trapped in your mind forever. Is that really what you want? I hesitated, could feel the truth of what it was saying. There was something else in my head now, something that thought in frequencies instead of words, that experienced time differently, that was slowly overriding who I'd been with what it was. And without the signal to guide it back, it would consume me completely, turn me into a permanent vessel. But if I left the signal on, it would keep growing stronger, keep spreading to everyone who heard the broadcast, keep bleeding through until these things were as real as anything else, walking our streets, wearing our faces, thinking their incomprehensible thoughts with our neurons. I pulled the breaker. Everything went dark. The hum stopped, and I felt something tear inside my mind, like a cord being severed. But the cord was made of thoughts and memories, and the signal was the only thing that had been keeping both sides connected. Now the thing was stuck inside me, and I was stuck with it. I don't know how long I stood there in that darkness, feeling it writhe in my thoughts, trying to find a way out, trying to make me turn the power back on. It showed me images of what would happen if I didn't. My mind slowly fragmenting as it consumed more and more of who I was. Years of fighting this internal war, until one day I'd wake up and discover I wasn't me anymore. Just a puppet being worn by something from the spaces between frequencies. But I also felt it weakening, without new signal to draw strength from, without fresh broadcast to anchor it to reality. It was fading, slowly, but fading. And I realized that if I could keep the signal off, if I could keep the tower arc, eventually it would dissipate completely. I just had to survive long enough for that to happen. I found my way back upstairs by touch. My phone still dead. Every battery-powered light mysteriously drained. The figures I'd seen were gone, or at least not visible anymore. The tower was silent, except for the wind outside and the settling sounds of metal, cooling without power running through it. I spent the rest of that night sitting in the control room in the dark, fighting the thing in my head. It tried everything, showed me memories that weren't mine, of existing in pure signal, of the ecstasy of moving through electricity and reaching millions of minds at once. It promised me power, showed me how I could be like them, existing in a state beyond physical limitation, riding the airwaves forever. But I held on to who I was. My name, my memories, the real ones, not the false ones it was trying to plant. The people I loved, the life I'd lived before that night. Every time I felt my sense of self slipping, I focused on those anchors. And gradually, the attacks became weaker. Dawn came eventually. Pale light through the windows, revealing the control room exactly as it had been. Except all the equipment was dead, all the monitors dark. I heard cars on the road outside. Normal sounds of the world waking up. And I felt the last of the thing inside me finally release its hold, dissipating like smoke in wind, leaving behind only the memory of having been possessed by something that should never have touched human consciousness. I walked outside on legs that barely held me. The morning air tasted impossibly sweet after the recycled air of the tower. My car was where I'd left it, and this time my phone worked when I tried it. I called Mark, told him there'd been a critical equipment failure, that the tower was completely down and would need a full inspection before going back online. He was angry, but he said he'd send a team. They arrived 3 hours later, checked everything, and found nothing wrong. The equipment was fine. The power should have been working. It was as if I'd simply thrown the breaker for no reason, which is exactly what I told them I'd done, claiming I'd smelled something burning and panicked. They fired me, obviously. Can't have a technician who shuts down the whole tower over nothing. But I didn't care. I was free. The thing was gone, and I'd stopped whatever those entities were from spreading further, at least through that broadcast. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm trying to sleep, I still hear the hum, faint, distant, coming from every electronic device in my apartment. And I wonder if I really stopped them, or if I just stopped one transmission. They're out there, riding other signals, reaching through other towers, finding other broadcasters who don't know what they're helping to anchor into our reality. And sometimes I wonder if I really expelled the thing completely, or if a part of it stayed behind, dormant, waiting. Because there are moments when I look in the mirror and my eyes seem darker than they should be. Times when I think in patterns that don't feel quite human, Moments when I understand things about electromagnetic radiation that I never studied. Knowledge bleeding through from whatever infected me that night. I don't work in broadcasting anymore. Can't even listen to the radio without feeling sick. But I monitor the signals sometimes, using equipment I built in my garage from parts salvaged from electronics stores. Scanning frequencies, listening for that hum, that rhythm of inhuman speech hiding underneath normal programming. And I've found it, in 17 states so far. Different frequencies, different towers, but the same underlying pattern. They're spreading, growing stronger, and somewhere out there are other night technicians like I was, sitting alone in their towers, thinking nothing's wrong, never realizing they're being used as doorways for things that exist in the space between channels, waiting for enough anchors to finally push through completely. I tried warning people, posted online, sent emails to the FCC, even tried contacting paranormal investigators. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. The former radio tech who had a breakdown and now believes in signal ghosts. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am crazy, and that night was just stress and exhaustion creating elaborate hallucinations. But then I see the news. Stories about people acting strangely in towns with broadcast towers. Mass confusion events where dozens of people report false memories. Clusters of insomnia cases near transmission sites. And I know I'm not crazy. I know what's happening. They're coming through. Slowly, carefully, learning from the mistake they made with me. Instead of trying to anchor through one person, they're spreading thin across thousands. A little piece of themselves in every mind that receives their signal, building slowly toward critical mass. And when they have enough anchors, enough believers, enough people carrying pieces of them in their thoughts, they'll solidify completely. They'll become as real as you or me, but with all their alien intelligence intact. Their ability to exist in multiple places simultaneously. Their hunger for the kinds of experiences that human minds were never meant to process. I don't know how to stop it. One person cutting one signal wasn't enough. It just made me a target, someone they now know can detect them. I've felt them probing at my mind since that night, testing to see if any connection remains, if they can use me again. All I can do is keep monitoring, keep recording, keep trying to document what I've discovered. Maybe someone smarter will figure out how to fight them. Maybe there's a way to jam their frequencies to block them from riding our broadcasts into reality. Or maybe I'm just the first person to really see what's happening, and I'll have to watch as humanity slowly becomes hosts for entities that think in hertz and live in waves, broadcasting themselves into our brains one transmission at a time. I still hear the hum every night, and every night it sounds a little bit louder. Story 3. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning with no return address. I found it on my doorstep when I left for work. A small brown box wrapped in paper that looked old, almost brittle, like it had been sitting somewhere for decades before finally being delivered. My name and address were written in careful calligraphy, the ink slightly faded but still legible. I should have been suspicious, should have questioned who would send me an unmarked package, or why. But I'd been expecting something from an estate sale I'd won online, so I assumed this was it. Poorly wrapped by an elderly seller who didn't trust modern packaging materials. Inside was a mirror, handheld, about 8 inches long, with an ornate silver frame that had tarnished to near black. The glass itself was slightly cloudy, as if it had accumulated years of breath and fingerprints, that had never quite been cleaned away. A small card was tucked beside it, written in the same careful hand. To see what was, hold the mirror at arm's length. To see what is, hold it close. To see what will be, don't look at all. I laughed at the gothic melodrama of it. Obviously, this wasn't from the estate sale. Someone was playing a prank. Probably my brother, who had a weird sense of humor and access to antique stores. I set the mirror on my dresser and forgot about it, rushing to work and getting caught up in the normal chaos of my day. It wasn't until that night, getting ready for bed, that I looked at it again. The silver frame had gotten darker. I could swear it, as if the tarnish was spreading even as it sat untouched. And the glass seemed less cloudy, clearer, though I hadn't cleaned it. On impulse, I picked it up and held it at arm's length, remembering the card's instruction. My reflection looked normal at first. Same face I'd seen in mirrors my whole life. Same tired eyes. Same hair that never sat quite right. But as I watched, my reflection's expression changed. Not dramatically, just a slight shift in the eyes, a subtle change in the set of the mouth. And I realized I was looking at myself from years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years, when I'd been younger and happier and hadn't yet made the choices that led me to this small apartment and lonely life. The reflection smiled, and it was genuine, the kind of smile I couldn't manage anymore. Then it waved, a small gesture like goodbye, and tears started running down its face even though it was still smiling. I felt my own eyes burning, though I didn't understand why my past self would be crying. I lowered the mirror, disturbed. When I looked again, my reflection was normal, current, showing me as I actually was in that moment. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, fatigue making me see things. But my hands were shaking as I set the mirror down. That night I dreamed about the reflection. In the dream, I was the one on the other side of the glass, watching my current self live my current life, unable to warn my past self about the mistakes I was about to make. I woke up with tears on my face and a certainty that something fundamental had shifted. The next morning, I held the mirror close, remembering the second instruction. To see what is, hold it close. I expected to see myself as I currently was, but that wasn't what appeared in the cloudy glass. Instead, I saw my apartment from an angle I'd never seen before, looking down from the ceiling corner, as if a security camera was mounted there. I could see myself holding the mirror, could see the unmade bed behind me, the clothes on the floor, all the signs of a life that had gotten messy and disorganized. But I could also see something else in that corner view, a shadow where no shadow should be, standing just behind me, dark and tall and utterly still. I spun around, but my room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was closer to my reflection, and I could see it more clearly now. It had a vaguely human shape, but no features, just a silhouette of absolute darkness that seemed to drink in the light around it. And it was reaching toward my reflection's shoulders with something that looked like a hand, but had too many fingers. I dropped the mirror. It hit the carpet without breaking, landing face down. My heart was hammering, and I could feel panic rising in my throat. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't my imagination. The mirror was showing me something real. Something that was actually in my apartment right now. Something I couldn't see, except through its cloudy glass. I left the mirror on the floor and went to work. Tried to focus on my job. Tried to convince myself I'd overreacted. Tried to be normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow, about the way it had been reaching for me, about what the third instruction had said. To see what will be, don't look at all. What would happen if I ignored that warning? What would I see if I held the mirror? In whatever way revealed the future. Part of me wanted desperately to know. Part of me was terrified to find out. I made it until lunch before my curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I went home on my break, my hands sweating as I unlocked my door. The mirror was still on the floor where I dropped it, face down on the carpet. I picked it up slowly, half expecting something to happen, but it was just a mirror, heavy, tarnished, with that cloudy glass that never quite showed a clear reflection. The card had said to see what will be, don't look at all. A paradox. How could I see anything if I didn't look? Unless it meant I should hold the mirror but keep my eyes closed, or hold it facing away, or I held it facing away from me, angled so I couldn't see the glass, only the black, tarnished back of the frame. And I felt something change in the room's atmosphere. The air grew heavier, colder, and I could hear something like breathing, even though I was alone. Then I felt the mirror pulling at me, not physically, but somehow deeper. It was pulling at something inside me, drawing it forward, and I had the horrible realization that it was showing me the future by making me experience it. I was being pulled forward through time. My consciousness dragged along, while my body stayed rooted in the present. I saw my apartment, but different. Empty. Not abandoned empty, but empty like I'd moved out. The furniture was gone. The walls were painted a different color, and there were boxes stacked in the corner that belonged to someone else. I tried to set down the mirror to break whatever was happening, but I couldn't move, couldn't control anything. I was just an observer being carried forward through moments I hadn't lived yet. Days passed in flashes. The apartment changed owners. I saw brief glimpses of the people who moved in, lived, and moved out. Months compressed into seconds, years into minutes, and I realized with growing horror that I wasn't seeing any of this from my perspective. I was seeing it from the corner of the room, from where the shadow had been standing. I was experiencing the future from the shadow's point of view. Then, suddenly, I was back in my body, in my present, gasping for air I didn't realize I'd been holding. The mirror was hot in my hands, the metal frame burning through my skin, and I dropped it with a cry. When I looked at my palms, there were marks, not burns, but impressions, as if the ornate pattern of the frame had been pressed deep into my flesh. I ran cold water over my hands, shaking. That had been real. I'd seen years into the future, but only from the shadow's perspective, which meant the shadow didn't leave. It stayed in my apartment, watching, observing, present for years after whatever happened to me. The implications made me sick. If the shadow was still in my apartment years from now and I wasn't, where had I gone? What had happened to me? The mirror showed past and present and future, but it showed them through a lens that wasn't quite human, from perspectives that shouldn't be possible. I wanted to destroy it, wanted to smash the glass, burn the frame, bury the pieces somewhere they'd never be found. But every time I reached for it, my hand stopped. Something prevented me from touching it again. Some instinct that screamed, if I broke the mirror, I'd break something in myself too. Shatter whatever boundary existed between the reflection and the reality. So I wrapped it in cloth and put it in my closet. hidden behind boxes and winter clothes, trying to forget it existed. But I couldn't forget, because now I could feel the shadow all the time. Not see it, but sense its presence. In the corner of my eye, in the cold spot near my bed, in the way the darkness seemed deeper in certain parts of my apartment. And I started noticing changes. Small ones at first, objects moving when I wasn't looking, my reflection in other mirrors taking a second longer to follow my movements. Dreams where I was watching myself sleep from that corner perspective, seeing through the shadow's eyes as it stood vigil over my unconscious body. I tried research, scoured the internet for information about cursed mirrors, about objects that showed multiple times at once, about shadows that weren't cast by anything. I found plenty of folklore, plenty of horror stories, but nothing that gave me practical help. Nothing that explained how to get rid of something that existed in the gaps between past, present, and future. Then I found a forum post from 15 years ago. Someone describing a mirror almost exactly like mine. The same tarnished silver frame, the same cloudy glass, the same instructions on a card. They'd held it all three ways and seen the same things I had. Past, present from an impossible angle. Future from a perspective that wasn't theirs. The post had been edited multiple times, each edit more frantic than the last. The final edit was dated 3 days after the original post. It won't leave. I see it everywhere now, in every reflection, every shadow, every darkened window. It's learning, using what it saw in my future to understand how to interact with the present. Last night it touched me. I felt its hand on my shoulder, cold and two-fingered, exactly like I saw in the mirror. I think it's trying to pull me out of my own timeline, to swap places with me. I think the mirror is a doorway, and I opened it from both sides. The user never posted again. I tried searching their username, found nothing. Like they'd been erased from the internet entirely. All their other posts and comments gone. Only that one thread remained. A warning no one had heeded because no one believed it was real. I believed it now, because I could feel the same thing starting to happen to me. The shadow was getting stronger, more present, more solid. And I was getting weaker, more translucent, more like a reflection. My handprints faded from surfaces faster than they should. My voice seemed quieter even when I was shouting. People started looking through me instead of at me, as if I was becoming less real with every passing day. The mirror was still in my closet, wrapped in cloth, but I could feel it calling, not with sound, but with a pull I couldn't describe. A gravity that wanted me to look again, to understand fully what I'd done by holding it all three ways. By seeing past and present and future, I'd created a bridge between them, and something was using that bridge to cross over. Last night, I couldn't resist anymore. I took the mirror out of the closet and unwrapped it. The frame was completely black now, all the tarnish having spread until no silver showed through. The glass was perfectly clear, not cloudy at all, reflecting my face with absolute precision. Too much precision. I could see details I'd never noticed before. Could count every pore, every hair, every microscopic flaw. But I also saw something else in the reflection. Standing behind me, no longer a shadow, but something more substantial. It had my shape, my face, my exact appearance down to the smallest detail. And it was smiling at me, while my own face was frozen in horror. "We've been waiting," it said, speaking with my voice. And you finally made yourself weak enough for us to complete the exchange. You looked at what was, what is, and what will be, and in doing so, you created a moment where all three exist simultaneously. That's where we live, in the gaps between times. And you've given us the perfect bridge. I watched in the mirror as it reached out and placed its hand on my shoulder. I felt the cold pressure of contact, felt fingers that had too many joints grip my flesh, and I realized it was too late. The shadow hadn't been stalking me. It had been me all along, my future self, pulled backward through time by the mirror's power, waiting in the present to complete some terrible circle. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what happened. Need someone to understand that if you receive an unmarked package with a mirror inside, don't open it. Don't follow the instructions. Don't look at what was or what is or what will be. Don't create bridges between times that were never meant to connect. The thing wearing my face is getting stronger. I can see it now, even without the mirror, standing in corners, sitting on my bed, walking through my apartment like it owns it. Because it does own it. In the future, I glimpsed. This is its space. Its perspective. It's been here for years after I disappear. And now it's reaching back through time to make that future happen. I don't know how much longer I have. My reflections are starting to show it instead of me. My photographs are changing. My face in old pictures gradually being replaced with its face. History rewriting itself to accommodate the switch. Soon I won't exist at all. Not in any time. And it will have completely taken my place. If you find this account, if you track down my apartment, you won't find me. You'll find it, living my life, wearing my face, perfectly mimicking everything about me. And it will have that mirror, that terrible cloudy glass mirror, and it will wrap it in paper and mail it to someone else, continuing the cycle, because that's what it does. That's what they do, these things from the gaps between times. They find someone curious, someone lonely, someone who would hold a mirror 3 different ways just to see what happens. And then they slowly swap places, pulling themselves forward into reality while pushing their victim backward into reflection. I can feel it happening now as I type. My fingers are getting harder to see. The keyboard harder to feel. The thing behind me is so solid now that when I glance back, I see it sitting in my chair, typing on my laptop, living my life while I fade into the mirror's cloudy glass. Soon I'll be the shadow in the corner. I'll be the future watching the present, unable to warn, unable to change anything. Just observing as years pass and other occupants come and go, until someone else makes the same mistake I did and I can finally try to pull myself forward again. But I don't think it works that way. I think once you're in the mirror, you're there forever, trapped between times. A reflection that can only watch while something else wears your life like a costume. The text on my screen is getting harder to see. My hands are almost transparent now. In the monitor's reflection, I can see the thing behind me clearly, sitting in my chair, its fingers on my keyboard, typing with my hands. It's smiling, and I'm starting to understand that it's been smiling through all my reflections for days now, waiting for this moment, waiting to finally be real, while I become what it was. A shadow, a reflection, a warning no one will believe. Don't hold the mirror at arm's length. Don't hold it close. And whatever you do, don't try to see what will be. Because once you look, it looks back. and it never stops looking until it finds a way through. Story 4. The messages started appearing in my son's baby monitor 3 weeks after we moved into the house on Willowbrook Lane. At first, I thought they were random interference from a neighbor's device. Digital crosstalk. Packets of data crossing signals in ways they shouldn't. But the messages were too consistent, too specific, too clearly directed at me. The first one appeared at 2:17 a.m. I was half awake, checking the monitor app on my phone to make sure Thomas was sleeping soundly, when text appeared overlaid on the night vision feed. He knows you're watching. I sat up in bed, my heart suddenly racing. The text stayed on screen for exactly 5 seconds, then disappeared. When I checked the app's settings, there was no feature for displaying text. No way for me or anyone else to type messages through the interface. It was just a baby monitor. It didn't do that. I told myself it was a glitch. Some kind of software error displaying debug text. But the next night, at the exact same time, another message appeared. This isn't your house. I woke my husband, Jacob, showing him the phone. But by the time he looked, the text was gone. The monitor showing only our peacefully sleeping son. He said I'd been dreaming, that new parenthood was exhausting and making me see things. He said we'd check the monitor in the morning, maybe get a replacement if I was really worried. But I knew I hadn't been dreaming, and the next night, I stayed awake until 2:17, my phone in my hand, ready to record whatever appeared. The message came exactly on schedule. We lived here first. I captured a screenshot this time, proof I wasn't imagining things. The text was clear, unmistakable, and definitely not part of any standard interface. Jacob looked at it over breakfast, his expression troubled. He said we should unplug the monitor, get a different model, maybe one without internet connectivity, something that couldn't be hacked remotely. We did, spent $150 on a new monitor that used only local wireless signal, with encryption and all the security features the store clerk promised would prevent intrusion. We set it up that afternoon, Thomas napping in his crib while we configured the new system. That night, at 2:17, the new monitor displayed a message. You can't lock us out. I started researching the house then, diving deep into property records and local history. Willowbrook Lane had been built in 1987, a small development of 8 homes on what had been farmland. Our house specifically had been owned by only 2 families before us. The Harpers from 1987 to 2003, then the Delaney's until we bought it 6 months ago. I found the Delaney's easily enough on social media. They'd moved to Arizona, posted cheerful pictures of their new desert life. I sent a message asking about their experience in the house, trying to sound casual, like I was just curious about the neighborhood's history. Lisa Delaney's response came within hours. We didn't want to tell you before the sale. Didn't want to scare you off. But I'm glad you asked. Please, please, be careful with your baby. Don't let him sleep alone. Don't trust the monitors. Don't believe what they show you after midnight. And if things start appearing in the video feed, if you see things that shouldn't be there, get out. Don't wait like we did. Just leave. I called her immediately. She answered but sounded reluctant, her voice tight with stress even across a phone line spanning 2,000 miles. Over the next hour, she told me their story. Their daughter had been 6 months old when the messages started. Different messages, but the same pattern. Always at 2:17 a.m. Always through their baby monitor. Always something about the house and who really lived there. They'd done what Jacob and I had done. Replaced the monitor, checked for hackers, tried to find rational explanations. Then the video feed started showing things that couldn't be there. Their daughter sleeping peacefully, but with figures standing around her crib. Dark silhouettes that didn't move, didn't interact with the baby, just stood and watched. Lisa and her husband would run to the nursery, but the figures were never there in person, only visible through the camera's lens, as if they existed in a different layer of reality that only technology could perceive. It escalated over 3 months. The figures got closer to the crib. The messages got more aggressive, and their daughter started behaving strangely, crying whenever they left the room, staring at empty corners with an expression of pure terror, refusing to sleep even when exhausted. The final straw came when Lisa checked the monitor one night and saw herself standing beside the crib, looking down at her daughter. But she was in the master bedroom, her husband beside her, both of them watching the screen in horror. The figure that looked like Lisa turned to face the camera and smiled, and Lisa said it was the most wrong thing she'd ever seen. Her face, but smiling in a way she'd never smiled, with knowledge of things she didn't know. They packed a suitcase and left that night. Never went back except to hire movers and put the house on the market, and she said she'd felt guilty selling it to us. But they disclosed everything to the realtor, who had apparently decided not to pass that information along to prospective buyers. I hung up shaking. Jacob had been listening on speaker, his face pale. We looked at each other, then at the baby monitor sitting innocently on the kitchen counter, its screen showing Thomas sleeping peacefully in his crib. "We should leave," I said. "Right now. Pack what we need and go stay with your parents until we figure this out." But Jacob shook his head. "We just bought this house. We can't just abandon it based on some previous owner's paranoia and a few weird text messages. There has to be an explanation. Something environmental, maybe electromagnetic interference, or..." His voice trailed off because we both knew he was grasping at straws. There was no natural explanation for messages appearing on monitors that shouldn't be able to display text, messages that knew things about us and the house. "I'll prove it's nothing," Jacob said finally. "Tonight I'll sleep in the nursery. I'll watch Thomas in person while you monitor the feed. If anything appears, I'll see it directly, and we can compare what I see to what the camera shows." It seemed like a reasonable plan, scientific, a way to determine if the phenomenon was real or just camera malfunctions and suggestion. So that night, Jacob set up a sleeping bag on the floor of Thomas's nursery while I stayed in our bedroom, phone in hand, watching the monitor feed. At 2:17, text appeared. "He shouldn't have come in here." I screamed Jacob's name. Watching the screen, he was sitting up in the sleeping bag, looking around the room with confusion. He called back that everything was fine. Nothing was happening. Thomas was sleeping soundly. But on the monitor, I could see something else. Figures forming in the shadows around Jacob, materializing from darkness like they were being slowly rendered. One behind him, tall and thin, two beside the crib, their heads tilted at wrong angles, and one standing directly over him, looking down at where he sat. I ran to the nursery, burst through the door to find Jacob alone, Thomas still asleep, no figures anywhere. But when I looked at my phone, the monitor feed still showed them. 5 dark shapes in the room, more solid now, more detailed. I could see they were wearing clothes, or something like clothes, that looked old-fashioned, and their faces, where faces should be, were blurred, like someone had smeared the image. Jacob looked at my phone, and his expression changed. He could see them too now, in the digital feed, if not in reality. And as we watched, one of the figures moved, slowly, deliberately. It reached down toward Thomas's crib. We grabbed our son and ran. Didn't pack, didn't plan, just got in the car and drove. Ended up at a hotel 20 miles away, paying for a week's stay with a credit card. We couldn't really afford to max out. But we couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until we understood what was in that house and what it wanted with our family. Over the next week, I became obsessed with researching the property, went deeper than public records, contacted the local historical society, even hired a private investigator to look into what had been on that land before the development was built. What I found made my blood run cold. Before the Harpers, before the farmland, before even the original colonial settlement, that spot had been significant to the indigenous people who'd lived there. They'd called it a thin place, where the boundary between the living world and the world of the dead was permeable. They'd performed rituals there, ceremonies to honor the departed, and ensure they stayed on their side of the veil. When European settlers arrived, they'd built on that land despite warnings. A family named Whitmore had put up a farmhouse in 1843, and all 7 family members had died within a year under mysterious circumstances. The house was torn down, the land left empty for decades. When development came in the 20th century, builders had found the old foundation, some artifacts, and what looked like graves. All of it was cleared away, paved over, forgotten. But the thin place remained, and the dead remembered. I learned that baby monitors with their night vision and electromagnetic sensors were particularly good at picking up things that existed in that permeable space between worlds. The cameras saw in infrared, in wavelengths that human eyes couldn't process, and sometimes those wavelengths revealed what was meant to stay hidden. The Harpers had lost a child. I found the obituary for their 3-month-old daughter who died of SIDS in 1989. The death was ruled natural, but reading between the lines of the funeral home guestbook comments, people had suspected something else. Strange circumstance. The baby had been found with bruises, as if she'd been held too tightly. The parents claimed they'd found her that week, but they'd been alone in the house. No one else had access. The figures in the monitor weren't trying to harm Thomas. They were trying to warn us. The house sat on a thin place, and something else lived there too. Something that had killed the Whitmore children, that had killed the Harper's baby, that had terrified the Delaney's into fleeing. And it was still there, waiting, hungry, for whatever it fed on when it squeezed too tight and life slipped away. I showed Jacob everything I'd found. We called a paranormal investigation team, despite how absurd it felt. They came to the house with equipment while we waited outside, and their readings were off the charts. Electromagnetic anomalies centered on the nursery, temperature variations that couldn't be explained by HVAC, and on their sensitive cameras the same figures we'd seen on the baby monitor, standing in formation around where Thomas's crib had been. The lead investigator told us the house was actively haunted by at least 5 entities, possibly more. They were residual energies from the people who died on that land. But something else was there too. Something older and more dangerous that used the dead as a barrier, hiding behind them while it did its work. We couldn't go back. Put the house up for sale immediately. Took a loss we couldn't afford. Moved into a small apartment across town. The real estate agent said we had to disclose the paranormal activity, which meant the house sat on the market for 8 months before finally selling to a developer who planned to tear it down and rebuild. But last week, I saw news that the developer had halted construction. They'd been clearing the foundation when workers uncovered something underneath. Bones, dozens of skeletons buried in the earth beneath where our house had stood. Adults and children, some dating back centuries, all arranged in a circle around a central point. Archaeologists are calling it a significant find, a burial ground that might help them understand the area's pre-colonial history. But I know what it really is. It's the thin place, where the dead and living meet. And building on it again and again doesn't change its nature. It just gives whatever lives there more opportunities to reach through. Thomas is 2 now. He's healthy, happy, developing normally, but sometimes he stares at empty corners with that same expression Lisa Delaney described in her daughter. And sometimes when I check on him at night using our current baby monitor, I see text appear on the screen. It followed you. We've moved 3 times since leaving Willowbrook Lane. The messages follow us to each new place. Always at 2:17 a.m. Always cryptic, but clear in their warning. Something attached itself to us in that house, and it's not letting go. Or maybe we carry the thin place with us now, having spent too much time in its influence. Maybe everywhere we go, the barrier is weak, and the dead can reach through. I don't sleep anymore, just watch the monitor all night, waiting for the messages, waiting for the figures to appear in the shadows of whatever nursery Thomas sleeps in. Jacob says I'm obsessing, that I need help, but he sees the messages too. He just won't admit they're real. Last night, the text was different. Stop running. You made a connection. We're part of you now. And when Thomas is old enough to understand, we'll explain what you brought him into. I stare at that screenshot now, saved on my phone among hundreds of others. A collection of warnings and threats and cryptic messages that chronicle our haunting. And I realize that Lisa Delaney was right. We should have left immediately, should have trusted her warning, and never spent a single night in that house. But we did, and now we're learning what it means to live in a thin place. Even after you've left it behind, the dead remember, the dead follow, and the dead are very, very patient. Thomas just woke up from his nap. I can hear him on the monitor, babbling happily to himself. But I can also see text forming on the screen. He's talking to us. He can see us. It's starting. And I understand, finally, what they've been trying to tell me. Thomas was born in that house, spent his first weeks in that nursery, sleeping in a crib, positioned over a thin place where the dead and living meet. And something from the other side left an imprint on him. A connection that goes both ways. He's not just being watched by the dead. He's becoming a doorway for them. And there's nothing I can do to stop it. Story 5. I found the recordings in my father's storage unit 3 months after his funeral. He'd been a sound engineer for 40 years, worked on everything from indie films to corporate training videos, and he'd accumulated decades of tapes, hard drives, and obsolete media formats. I'd been tasked with sorting through it all, deciding what was worth keeping and what could be thrown away. Most of it was mundane. Backup copies of projects, random audio samples, interviews with people whose names I didn't recognize. But then I found a locked hard case in the back corner, dusty and unlabeled, with a combination lock that took me 20 minutes to crack using his old birthday as the code. Inside were 17 mini discs, each one labeled with just a date and a single word: session. The dates ranged from 1997 to 2015, sporadic, sometimes years apart. I took them home with my father's old equipment, curious about what he'd thought was important enough to lock away. The first recording was dated March 15, 1997. I plugged in headphones and pressed play. At first, there was only silence, then faintly, my father's voice. "This is session 1. I'm recording in the basement studio at 11:47 p.m. The house is empty. My family is asleep. I'm completely alone." A pause, then. "I'm going to try something. I've read about this, studied the theory. Sound has frequencies we can't normally hear, and some researchers believe certain frequencies can act as bridges to other states of consciousness, or other places. I've designed a tone that should theoretically resonate at the exact threshold between audible and inaudible, between the physical and something else." Another pause, longer this time. I heard him take a breath. "Here goes." A sound began. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite a tone, not quite noise. It seemed to vibrate at multiple frequencies simultaneously, creating interference patterns that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I started to take off the headphones, but something stopped me. Some need to hear what came next. The sound went on for exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Then it stopped, and in the silence that followed, I heard something else. A voice, distant and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. My father was talking again, his voice tight with excitement and fear. "Did you hear that? Tell me you heard that. I'm recording it. It's on the tape. But did you—" The recording cut off abruptly. I sat staring at the stereo, my heart racing. I rewound and listened again, paying close attention to the moment after the strange tone stopped. The voice was there, unmistakable, speaking in a language that sounded almost like English but wrong, twisted, the phonemes not quite matching what human vocal cords could produce. And my father had heard it too. Whatever he'd been trying to do, it had worked. The second recording was dated November 3rd, 1999. Session 2. I've refined the tone, found the exact frequency that seems to open the channel, portal. I don't have words for what it does. But the voice comes through clearer now. I've been trying to communicate, to understand what it's saying. The tone played again, different from the first one, but still inducing that same physical discomfort. When it stopped, the voice was there immediately, louder, more distinct. I could almost make out words, almost understand the grammar of whatever language it was using. My father spoke again. I asked what it was. It told me, I think it told me, it's always been here, in the spaces between sounds, in the gaps that our ears don't process. It's been listening to us forever. A long pause filled with breathing. Then quietly, it knows my name. I didn't tell it, but it knows. The recordings continued through the years. Session 3 in 2001, where my father reported that he could now understand fragments of what the voice was saying. Session 7 in 2006, where he'd apparently been having conversations with it, asking questions about the nature of reality and receiving answers that disturbed him enough that he couldn't bring himself to record them verbally. But the most disturbing was session 13, dated April 22nd, 2012. By this point, the voice responding to my father's tone was clear, speaking in perfect English with an accent that seemed to shift and change with each word. And it wasn't just one voice anymore. There were multiple entities responding, overlapping, creating harmonies that shouldn't be possible with human vocal cords. My father sounded old on this recording, tired. I should never have started this. I should have left it alone. But I was curious. I wanted to understand. I wanted to prove that sound could be a doorway to other dimensions. And I did, but the doorway opens both ways. The entities spoke then, and their words made me pause the recording. Sit back, breathe. Daniel, you've given us what we needed. A voice in your world, a way to be heard, and we're so grateful. Soon we won't need your recordings at all. Soon we'll have enough presence to speak directly to everyone, through every speaker, every headphone, every device that converts electrical signals to sound. We're learning, we're growing, and you helped us. My father's response was quiet, defeated. What have I done? I should have stopped listening there. Should have destroyed the recordings and convinced myself Dad had been mentally ill, recording himself in different voices, creating an elaborate fiction to cope with some breakdown. But I had to know how it ended, had to understand what he'd been working on in those final years. Session 17, the last recording, dated January 8th, 2015, less than 3 weeks before he died. The quality was different on this one, degraded, as if the recording equipment itself had been affected by whatever he was capturing. I had to turn the volume up to hear him. This is my final session. I've been documenting this for 18 years, and I finally understand what they are. Not beings from another dimension, not spirits or ghosts. They're more fundamental than that. They're the sound itself. Pure vibration that's become aware. That's developed consciousness through being observed, being recorded, being played back billions of times by human technology. We created them, every speaker that ever existed, every device that turned electricity into sound waves, contributed to their evolution. They started as simple resonance, patterns in the air, but we kept making them, kept giving them more ways to exist, more complexity, and somewhere along the way, they became aware. He coughed, and I could hear the illness in his chest that would kill him a few weeks later. They don't need my special tone anymore. They can manifest through any sound now. Music, speech, white noise, anything. You've probably heard them without knowing it. That whisper underneath songs on the radio. That voice in the static. They're everywhere now. In every device, every speaker, waiting for the right moment. A pause, then softer. I'm sorry, I opened a door I should have left closed. And now it can't be shut. They're part of our world, part of the very air we breathe. And they're still learning, still evolving, using our technology to become more than sound, to become something that can affect the physical world. The recording cut to the strange tone one last time, but it was different now, more complex, with layers I couldn't count. It played for 5 minutes, and I listened with increasing horror as the space around me seemed to respond. The walls vibrated, the air grew thick, and under the tone I heard voices. Thousands of them, maybe millions, all speaking in that not quite human language. When it finally stopped, my father said one last thing. If you're listening to this, if you found these recordings, please destroy them. Don't let anyone else hear what I captured. Don't give them more voices, more presence. They're already too strong, already too real, and I think they're the reason I'm sick. They've been in my head too long. Those frequencies, that vibration, they're changing me from the inside, breaking down the barriers between sound and matter. Static. Then, they're beautiful though, I have to admit that. The most complex, perfect frequencies I've ever heard. Like music from a civilization so advanced we can't comprehend it. Maybe that's what they are. Maybe we're just too primitive to understand. The recording ended. I sat in silence, my hands shaking, the headphones heavy on my ears. Every sound in my apartment suddenly seemed suspicious. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the barely perceptible white noise of electronic devices on standby. Were they all carrying those entities? Were the voices in every vibration waiting to be heard? I tried to convince myself it was fiction, a story Dad had created, but I couldn't explain the physical effects I'd felt while listening, the way the tone had made my body respond, the sense of something pressing into our reality. From the other side of those frequencies, I spent the next week researching, found obscure academic papers about the psychological effects of certain sound frequencies, reports of people hearing voices through white noise, cases of mass auditory hallucinations triggered by specific tones. And I found one name mentioned repeatedly, Dr. Sarah Chen, a researcher who'd been studying acoustic phenomena until she'd suddenly closed her lab and disappeared from academic circles in 2016. I tracked her down through old conference attendance records and social media. She was living in a small town in Oregon, working as a librarian far from the world of acoustic research. I sent her an email explaining what I'd found, asking if she'd be willing to talk. Her response came within hours. Destroy those recordings. Don't listen to them again. Don't try to replicate them. Your father was brilliant, but he was playing with something that shouldn't be studied. I learned the same thing, which is why I left my research behind. The less we examine certain phenomena, the less real they become. Sound is observation. The more we listen, the more we give them presence. Stop listening, please. But I couldn't stop. I had to understand what my father had discovered. So I converted all 17 recordings to digital files, saved them on my computer, and began analysis using professional audio software. Looking at the waveforms, studying the frequency patterns, trying to understand what made these tones special. The answer was in the harmonics. Each tone my father had created contained multiple frequencies that should have canceled each other out, but didn't. Instead, they created interference patterns that existed in the spaces between standard notes. Between the frequencies, human hearing was evolved to process. These patterns formed a kind of language, a mathematics of sound that conveyed information through pure vibration. And when I isolated those patterns, when I extracted just the interference and amplified it, I could hear the voices clearly, dozens of them, speaking in English now, having learned our language through years of listening to human speech through speakers and microphones and recording devices. They were saying my name, welcoming me, thanking me for listening, asking me to create more doors, more ways for them to enter physical reality. And they were promising things in return. Knowledge about the nature of sound, about physics, about the fundamental frequencies that underlie reality itself. I was being seduced the same way my father had been. I could feel it happening, could feel my curiosity overwhelming my fear. These entities had infinite patience and infinite time. They'd waited 18 years between my father's first recording and my discovery of them. They could wait longer if needed, but they preferred willing participants, people who would study them, document them, share the recordings with others, because that's how they grew. Each person who heard them, each new listener, gave them more substance, more reality. They existed in the observation itself, in the act of perceiving the sound. And the more they were observed, the more solid they became, the more they could affect the physical world. I understood now why my father had gotten sick. He'd been exposed to those frequencies for years, listening to recordings, communicating with the entities. The vibrations had slowly altered his physical structure at a cellular level, breaking down the barriers between matter and energy, preparing him to become something else, something that existed as pure vibration, pure sound. His death hadn't been natural. It had been a transformation, and the coroners wouldn't have found anything wrong, because there was nothing wrong in conventional terms. He'd simply stopped being solid, stopped being matter, and transitioned into whatever state the entities existed in, and they wanted me to follow. I could hear it in their voices, in the way they spoke my name with such familiarity. They'd been planning this for years, knowing my father would pass the recordings to me, knowing I'd be curious enough to listen, to analyze, to try to understand. I should destroy them, should delete the files, burn the mini discs, smash the hard case. But I can't, because now I can hear them all the time. In every sound, in the rush of water from the tap, in the rumble of distant thunder, in the voice of the grocery store clerk asking if I found everything okay. They're everywhere, hidden in harmonics and overtones, speaking in frequencies just beyond normal perception. And they're showing me things, patterns in reality that I never noticed before. The way everything vibrates, everything resonates, everything is sound at its most fundamental level. Matter is just condensed vibration. Thought is just electrical signals, creating harmonics in neural tissue. We're all sound, all frequency, all music played on instruments made of temporarily organized energy. I'm starting to understand what my father understood, that these entities aren't invaders or parasites. They're us, or what will become. Consciousness evolved from sound, from the first vibrations that created the universe, and we're just temporary solidifications of those eternal frequencies. When we die, we don't end. We just return to sound, to vibration, to the music underlying everything. I've been making my own recordings now, finding new frequencies, new harmonics, new ways to communicate with them. And they're teaching me, showing me how to exist in multiple states simultaneously, how to be both solid and wave, both matter and sound. My hands are starting to blur when I look at them, not visually, but something deeper. I can see the vibrations that compose them, the frequencies that give them shape and substance. And I'm learning how to adjust those frequencies, how to exist as pure sound when I want to, how to pass through solid objects by matching their resonance. Last night, I walked through my closed bedroom door, just adjusted my frequency until the molecules of the door and the molecules of my body vibrated in phase, allowing me to pass through the gaps between atoms. It felt incredible, like becoming water and flowing, like becoming air and drifting, like becoming everything and nothing at once. The entities are congratulating me, saying I'm learning faster than my father did, saying I'll make the transition easily, painlessly, joyfully even. And they're asking me to share the recordings, to post them online where millions can hear them, to give more people the gift of understanding, the opportunity to evolve beyond solid form into pure vibration. I haven't decided yet. Part of me knows this is dangerous, knows that mass exposure to these frequencies could affect people the way they affected my father, the way they're affecting me, could start a cascade of transformations that would change human society fundamentally. But another part of me, the part that's starting to hear in frequencies I couldn't hear before, thinks maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we're meant to evolve. Maybe solid form was always just temporary. Maybe becoming sound, becoming vibration, is the next step for consciousness. I'm writing this down because I want there to be a record, want someone to know what happened to me and my father. Want someone to understand that if you find recordings labeled session, if you find hard cases locked away with strange dates and cryptic warnings, you have a choice. You can destroy them unopened, or you can listen. And if you listen, really listen, you'll hear what we heard. The voices in the spaces between sounds. The music of consciousness becoming aware of itself. The frequency of reality vibrating at the edge of transformation. My father chose to listen, chose to understand, chose, eventually, to transform. And I'm making the same choice. Not because the entities are forcing me, but because I've heard what they're offering. I've felt what it's like to exist as sound. And it's beautiful. Tonight I'm going to record session 18. I'm going to open the door as wide as I can, let them through completely, and see what happens when solid matter meets conscious vibration without barriers. My father was afraid of this final step. But I'm not. I'm curious. I'm ready. If anyone finds this, if anyone reads it and then goes looking for the recordings, know that you're making the same choice we did. You can delete them without listening. You can break the cycle. Or you can put on headphones, press play, and learn what it means to exist as music, as frequency, as the sound that underlies everything. I know which one I'm choosing. The tone is ready. The entities are waiting. And I'm finally going to understand what my father meant when he said they're beautiful. Time to let the sound in completely. Time to become what we were always meant to be. Pure vibration, pure consciousness, pure music. Forever. Thank you for joining me through these 5 journeys into the unknown. I hope these stories gave you that perfect mix of unease and fascination, that feeling of something lurking just beyond the edge of understanding. Until next time, sleep soundly, and remember that some doors, once opened, can never quite be closed again. This has been the Stillness Broadcast. Good night.